I think reading and writing are two different activities altogether, that people don't really realize. Reading, two different activities. A writer writes and just it's all done. A reader reads, but what the reader finds may not mean what the writer intended. That's perfectly in order. Perfectly in order. No writer has control over his written work. No writer has complete control over it, and other people may find different things in it that he never even imagined. And that's perfectly in order as well. And I was amazed some of the things by people who were able to deduce from what I wrote, and I'm very edified by that, of course. But I really am. I find it quite extraordinary. Now, how did I begin to write this book? If it help you to see how it came into existence. I had done a course at Sister Paul's Foundation on 2 occasions, 2 6-week courses on forgiveness. So it was not an area that was entirely unknown to me in terms of exploration. I've always felt forgiveness was very underexplored. I always felt that underexplored, and I always felt that we preachers, as Martin was saying quite appropriately, I thought we preachers do it, give it really short shrift in terms of getting into understanding what the knobby problems are in forgiveness. I have always striven to sort of to be respectful of forgiveness as a process, and difficulties particularly in it as something to be regarded as very respectfully. As Martin said, I felt the same way myself. One of the things people confess most routinely in confession is, Father, I'm unforgiving. I mean they find it hard to forgive. And that, to my mind, has always been perfectly understandable, especially if you've been badly hurt. So I've always had that sympathy for certain aspects of it, and I've spent some time thinking about it. What I like to say here about that is, I take time to think. I don't mind saying that. I think thinking takes time. It takes time. It shouldn't be hurried. I've changed my mind many times, and I will change my mind again many times in the future. But I wouldn't change them just for so. I do think thinking takes time, and we spend too little time thinking in the country, or in the church for that matter, but that's my view. I don't do that, I must say. I just don't do that. So that was my first sort of encounter with forgiveness occurred through the courses I did with Sister Paul. 2 summers ago, I went back to Yale, which I go back there quite often, and I talked to a professor friend of mine who was my thesis advisor in the old days. We're good friends now. And I was chatting with her all sorts of things, and she said to me, why don't you write something? So I said, well, what? That's my difficulty. So I said, what to write? And she said to me, in chatting with her further, she said to me, she has a few pages written on forgiveness. She said to me, why don't we do something about that together? I said, that'd be very nice. I'm very honored that she would suggest that we work on something together. So when I left her, I went to Florida, I think, for a few weeks. And while I was there, I began to work on it on my own. I put together sort of working bibliography. I ordered a lot of books, Amazon and stuff, and they began to come, and I began to read up on the stuff. And one of the first things I read was a volume by Princeton University on South Africa. That's how South Africa came to my consciousness, really. It's a marvelous volume about dealing with that commission from several aspects. I was blown away by the whole experience. I don't mind saying, I think that thing in South Africa was a remarkable event, as a process as well. I still can't get over what I read, what I learned from that whole process. When you read the book, you'll see that I refer to it quite often throughout, understandably, because I think South Africa taught me a great deal. It filled out my understanding of forgiveness in several different directions. So I wrote back to her. I said, by the way, I think I'll do it on my own. Because she'd have taken it with it 2 years before she got around to doing anything. So I said, in the meantime, I'll work on my own. She said, fine, go right ahead. So that's how it was generated. Writing is Naipaul says somewhere, writing is a trick. Naipaul says these things. It's a trick because you have to sort of see how a thing reads, how it feels, and how it's put together. And I like doing that, I must say. And I regard the months I spent writing this book as I spent all day working with it sometimes. I didn't mind it at all. I enjoyed it immensely. When I was when it's finished, I was very sad. It was all done. But, I do want to say quite simply that I appreciate everything that was said. I really appreciate it. I've learned a great deal listening to the speakers this evening. So Terence, you taught me a great deal about what you got out of it. So, so did Martin, so did Catherine, of course, and Raymond. I learned a great deal from all of you and what you got from it. I hope you all, in your own ways, get more than I did from what you have heard this evening and what your own reading will show you. I do think forgiveness is. The last thing I want to say is this: I've always been intrigued by processes. That is to say, in terms of change, how one state or one condition becomes another has always fascinated me. How you sort of isolate the elements of change or processes. And forgiveness is just such a thing. How do we move from hurt to forgiveness? How can we understand and grasp the process involved? What are the elements of it? That's what I was very stricken by that, and I still am to some extent. And as I say, it's the kind of thinking that I always enjoy doing very, very much. I do think forgiveness is an important key to liberation, both personal and social, both personal and social. I think where personal conversion is concerned, it demands a change of character. I do think that. Forgiveness requires a change of character. I think the person who is hurt and who forgives are two different people altogether. I do think that. Socially speaking, it's much more complex, of course, but it's also, I think we can get beyond heinous things, as life has shown us, South Africa certainly has shown us. We can get beyond heinous experiences if we are big enough and become big enough, are able therefore to forgive. If you read the testimony of some of the witnesses of South Africa, some of the people who suffer the most, if you follow me, with the most severe sorts of personal losses, the generosity was staggering. Staggering. You wonder how people become that, how people become like that. I have no idea. But they do. They do. The extraordinary examples of generosity and selflessness after enormous hurt, enormous tragedy, and enormous suffering. It's still possible, eh? It is still possible. Let's work at it. Thank you all very much.